We're counting down 30 strange poor man lunches from the Great Depression that America completely forgot. These are the midday meals that kept families alive when banks collapsed. Bread lines stretched for blocks, and a single nickel had to feed for mouths. From sandwiches built on nothing but condiments to pies made without a single apple. Each entry tells the story of American grit, creativity, and the quiet desperation that turned empty cupboards into dinner tables. Expect ingredients your grandchildren would not recognize as food, flavors born from pure survival, and tricks that fed a nation when the nation had almost nothing left. Which forgotten lunch tops our list? Let's begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30. The ketchup sandwich anchored the lunchboxes of families who had run out of almost everything else. 2 slices of white bread, a thick smear of Heinz ketchup straight from the bottle, and nothing in between. By 1933, when unemployment hit 25%, a 14 ounces bottle of ketchup cost around 15 and could stretch across to dozen sandwiches. Children carried them to school wrapped in wax paper, the red sauce soaking into the bread by noon, turning the middle pink and soggy. Oral histories from Oklahoma and the Dust Bowl recall mothers apologizing quietly as they handed them over, promising something better tomorrow. Nobody complained. The sandwich silenced hunger, and that was the only measure that mattered. Number 29. The mustard sandwich was the ketchup sandwich's sharper cousin, favored in households where French's yellow mustard outlasted every other condiment in the icebox. A jar cost about a dime, and that single jar could anchor a week of lunches. Mothers spread it edge to edge on day-old bread, sometimes pressing the slices together so tightly the mustard bled through the crust. The flavor was loud, vinegary, and unforgiving, but it masked the staleness of bread that had sat too long on the counter. Children in Pittsburgh and Detroit remembered the sting on their tongues, the way it woke them up in the middle of a gray afternoon. It was not a meal. It was a decision to keep going. Number 28. The mayonnaise sandwich was the soft, gentler option for children who could not face another round of mustard or ketchup. Housewives whipped up homemade mayo from a single egg, a cup of oil, and a splash of vinegar, stretching it across a dozen lunches. Some families splurged on a jar of Hellmann's, which had spread from New York delis to national shelves by the late 20s. The bread turned slick and pale, the mayo soaking in until the slices fused into something almost custardy. In the South, they called it a white sandwich. And in oral histories from Alabama, grown men still remember the quiet shame of opening a lunch pail to find nothing but that pale, slippery square. Yet they ate every bite. Number 27. The sugar sandwich was the rare lunch that passed for a treat, though the ingredients told a harder story. White bread, a thin layer of butter if any could be spared, and a heavy dusting of granulated sugar pressed into the surface until it clung. A 5 pounds bag of sugar cost around 25 cents in 1932, and a single bag could sweeten lunches for a month. Children carried them to schoolhouses across the Midwest, trading them for apples when the deal was good. The sugar would crunch between the teeth, the bread soft and yielding beneath, and for a few minutes it felt like dessert instead of desperation. Mothers watched the meat with complicated expressions, grateful the children still saw sweetness in something so thin. Number 26. Butter and sugar sandwiches elevated the plain sugar sandwich into near celebration territory, reserved for birthdays or Sundays when spirits needed lifting. Housewives whipped softened butter with brown sugar until the mixture turned into a coarse sandy paste. They spread it thick across bread that had been lightly toasted to hold the weight. The butter melted slightly from the toast's warmth, and the brown sugar dissolved into caramel pockets that children hunted for with their tongues. Oral histories from rural Kentucky recall fathers slipping these into lunch pails on payday, a small bribe against the long walk to the mine. The sandwich cost pennies, but it carried the weight of a promise that things eventually would turn around. Number 25. The large sandwich was the unvarnished truth of Depression hunger. A meal stripped of every ornament. Mothers spooned rendered pork fat onto bread, sometimes sprinkled salt across the top, and handed it over without apology. Lard was cheap, around 8 cents a pound in 1933, and every butcher's scrap eventually ended up in a tin on the stove, cooling into pale white grease. The fat carried calories that thin soup could not, and a working father needed those calories to last through a shift. Children in Appalachian coal towns learned to eat them slowly, letting the lard coat the roof of the mouth. It tasted of nothing much, just warmth and salt, and the quiet promise that supper might come. Number 24. Onion sandwiches ruled the lunch pails of men who worked outdoors and did not care who sat next to them afterward. A thick slice of raw white onion layered between bread with butter or lard cost almost nothing. A single onion could make 4 or 5 sandwiches. A 3lb sack sold for about 10 cents at the grocer. The bite was fierce enough to water the eyes, but the sweetness emerged after the first few chews, and the smell lingered on the breath long past sundown. Oral histories from Chicago's stockyard workers recall the onion sandwich as a badge of labor. You smelled a man's lunch before you saw him, and nobody flinched. It was food for people who had nothing left to prove. Number 23. The peanut butter and onion sandwich sounds like a dare, but it was a genuine Depression staple, especially in farming communities across Iowa and Nebraska. Peanut butter was cheap and full of protein, about 23 cents a pound, for the store brand jars, and raw onion added crunch and moisture that otherwise had to come from meat. The combination was sweet, sharp, and strangely satisfying, coating the mouth in a way no single ingredient could. Farm wives packed them for husbands, heading out to fields stripped bare by drought, and children in one-room schoolhouses swapped stories about who had the bravest lunch. Nobody called it strange back then. It was simply what peanut butter and onions could do together when there was nothing else on the shelf. Number 22. The fried bologna sandwich carried a whiff of working-class luxury. The kind of meal a family celebrated when the paycheck actually came through. A pound of bologna sold for around 20 cents in 1934, and a single pound could stretch into 8 or 9 sandwiches. Housewives sliced it thick, scored the edges so it would not curl, and fried it hot until the rim browned and crisped. Laid between bread with mustard or a smear of mayonnaise, the sandwich carried more flavor than its price tag suggested. Children raced home from school, hoping to smell that unmistakable grease in the pan. Bologna was processed meat's quiet gift to hungry America. And for many, the fried slice was as close to steak as Tuesday ever got. Number 21. Milk toast was the meal given to the sick, the very young, and the elderly who could no longer chew hard bread. Mothers warmed a cup of milk on the stove, buttered a slice of toast, laid it in a shallow bowl, and poured the hot milk over the top until the bread turned soft and porous. A pinch of salt or a dusting of sugar finished it off. The entire meal cost less than 3 and could be made in under 5 minutes. Oral histories from the Dust Bowl recall milk toast as the food of recovery, the meal that followed fevers and long nights. It tasted of nothing much, but it was warm and gentle. And in 1934, warmth and gentleness were harder to find than meat. Number 20. Water pie emerged from a kitchen experiment so improbable it sounds apocryphal. Yet, recipe cards. Passed between neighbors across West Virginia and Tennessee confirm it was real. Housewives mixed a cup of water, flour, sugar, vanilla extract, and a handful of butter shavings, poured the thin slurry into an unbaked pie crust, and slid it into the oven. 40 minutes later, something genuinely transformed. The mixture set into a pale custard with a wobbly sweetness that tasted faintly of butterscotch. The entire pie cost around 6 cents to make. Children ate it in silence, unsure whether to call it dessert or a miracle. It was both. Water pie was the clearest proof that Depression mothers could summon something from nearly nothing. Number 19. Vinegar pie predated water pie by decades, but found its revival during the lean years when lemons cost too much and apples had already been canned away. Housewives whisked apple cider vinegar with sugar, flour, and a single egg, pouring the tart mixture into a crust and baking until the top turned golden and the center barely trembled. The flavor mimicked lemon meringue with surprising accuracy, sharp and sweet at once. A gallon of cider vinegar cost around 30 cents and produced 20 pies worth of filling. Oral histories from the Ozarks recall vinegar pie appearing at church potlucks where nobody asked questions about the absent fruit. The crust held it together. The sugar softened the bite, and the plate came home empty every time. Number 18. Mock apple pie was the most famous sleight of hand in Depression baking. A dessert that contained 0 apples, but somehow fooled the tongue. The 1934 recipe printed on the back of the Ritz cracker box called for 20 crushed crackers, water, sugar, cream of tartar, and cinnamon. Housewives layered the mixture inside a pie crust, and the result emerged from the oven, looking and tasting startlingly like apple pie. The crackers softened into a texture that mimicked stewed fruit, and the cinnamon carried the illusion the rest of the way. A box of Ritz cost about 19 cents and could fill 2 pies. Children who tasted it never realized the trick. Some families kept making mock apple pie long after the Depression ended, preferring the memory to the real thing. Number 17. Prune pudding earned its fame when First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt served it at White House luncheons in 1933, partly as a gesture of solidarity with struggling Americans and partly because the White House budget had tightened like everyone else's. Housewives simmered dried prunes with sugar, cornstarch, and a splash of lemon until the mixture thickened into a dark, glossy sludge. A 1 bag of prunes cost around 10 cents and fed a family of 5. The pudding was cooled, spooned into bowls, and served with a thin stream of evaporated milk, if any could be spared. Newspapers mocked it mercilessly, calling the White House menu an insult to American taste. But in kitchens across the country, prune pudding fed children who had never seen a fresh fruit in their lives. Number 16. Wacky cake, sometimes called crazy cake or depression cake, solved the impossible math of baking without eggs, milk, or butter. Housewives mixed flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, salt, vegetable oil, vinegar, and water directly in the baking pan, stirring with a fork until the batter came together. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to lift the cake into a tender crumb, and the cocoa masked any strange aftertaste. A single cake cost about 12 cents to make in 1935, a fraction of the price of any traditional recipe. Children in Oregon and Missouri remember the ritual of stirring the batter in the pan itself, a small act of kitchen magic that delivered real cake on a Sunday. Wacky cake still survives in family recipe boxes, though most bakers have no idea why it exists. Real quick, if you want the full collection, I put together a cookbook with 100 simple meals just like these. The link is right below in the description. Now, back to the countdown. Number 15. Cracker soup was the lunch of absolute last resort. The meal fate appeared when even the pantry's dry goods had dwindled to crumbs. Housewives crushed saltine crackers into a bowl, poured boiling water over them, added a pat of butter if any remained, and stirred until the crackers swelled into a thick salty mush. The entire meal cost under 4 cents per serving. Oral histories from West Virginia coal towns recall children eating it by the spoonful, blowing on each bite because the water was still scalding. It tasted mostly of salt and hot starch, but it was filling and it was warm. And for a family watching the last of the flour disappear, cracker soup was the bridge to whatever came next. Number 14. Dandelion salad turned the front yard into a grocery store when the icebox ran empty. Housewives sent children out with bowls to pick the youngest, tendest dandelion greens before they turned bitter, usually in early spring. The leaves were washed, tossed with bacon, grease, a splash of vinegar, and a sprinkle of sugar, then served warm over whatever bread was on hand. A bowl cost absolutely nothing. Oral histories from Polish and Italian immigrant families across Pennsylvania recall dandelion salad as the first real food of spring, the meal that marked winter's end. The greens were slightly bitter, bright with vinegar, and unexpectedly satisfying. The yard had become a pantry, and the pantry had become survival. Number 13. Cornmeal mush anchored breakfast and lunch across the rural South for the entire Depression. Housewives boiled a pot of water, stirred in yellow cornmeal until the mixture thickened into porridge, and served it plain with a pat of butter or a drizzle of molasses. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost about 12 cents and could feed a family for a week. The leftovers were poured into a loaf pan, chilled overnight, then sliced and fried in lard the next day, producing a second meal from the same batch. Children ate mush standing up, sitting down, and sometimes walking out the door. It was bland, filling, and reliable. The rhythm section of depression cooking, always present, rarely celebrated. Number 12. Hot water. Cornbread skipped the eggs, milk, and leavening that modern cornbread requires, producing a dense, chewy cake made from just cornmeal, salt, and boiling water. Housewives shaped the hot dough into patties with wet hands, then fried them in a skillet slicked with bacon grease until the outsides crisped, golden. A single pound of cornmeal produced enough patties for a family of 6. The flavor was earthy and unadorned. The texture somewhere between a biscuit and a pancake. Oral histories from Mississippi and Arkansas recall hot water cornbread as the bread of tenant farmers, the lunch eaten in fields still damp with morning dew. It cost pennies to make and carried the weight of an entire workday on its shoulders. Hoey cakes predated the Depression by a century, but they returned to American tables with a vengeance during the 1930s. The simplest version called for cornmeal, water, and salt fried in a hot skillet until the edges browned and the middle firmed up. The name came from the legend that field workers once cooked them on the blade of a hoe held over an open fire. A skillet of hoe cakes cost less than 5 cents and fed for people. Children carried leftover hoe cakes wrapped in cloth to schoolhouses where they softened them with a splash of milk or a smear of lard at lunch. The taste was plain and toasty, a reminder that American cooking had always been able to stretch corn into something almost resembling a meal. Number 10. Corn mush and molasses were the sweet version of the same workhorse meal, upgraded with a drizzle of blackstrap molasses when molasses could be afforded. A quart jar of molasses sold for about 15 cents and lasted a family several weeks. Housewives ladled hot cornmeal mush into bowls, poured the mush into bowls, poured the into a pink savory gravy. Ladled over hot biscuits split in half, it became lunch, breakfast, or dinner, depending on what else the day offered. A can of tomatoes cost around 8 cents, and a batch of biscuits maybe 6 cents more. Oral histories from Tennessee recall tomato gravy as the last resort, the trick that turned empty shelves into something edible. The flavor was tangy, creamy, and unexpectedly rich. Proof that a single can could carry an entire meal. Number 8. Creamed peas on toast was the gentle, pale lunch served in homes where a single can of peas had to become a full meal. Housewives drained the peas, made a white sauce from flour, butter, and milk, folded the peas into the sauce, and spooned the mixture over toasted bread. A can of peas cost around 9, and the whole lunch came in under 15 cents for a family of 4. The flavor was soft, buttery, and faintly sweet, the toast crunching pleasantly beneath the creamy top. Oral histories from New England recall creamed peas as the food of widows and elderly neighbors, the meal served when a family needed something warm and easy. It was stretching, and it was quiet cooking for quiet times. Number 7. Potato peel pancakes were the Depression's sharpest lesson in waste. A recipe that took what most kitchens threw away and turned it into lunch. Housewives saved peels from breakfast potatoes, chopped them fine, mixed them with a little flour, an egg if available, salt and pepper, then fried the mixture into small crispy cakes. A pound of potatoes cost around 3 cents, and the peels that would have gone into the compost bucket became a second meal. Oral histories from immigrant neighborhoods in Cleveland and Milwaukee recall the pancakes sizzling in lard, crackling golden at the edges. The flavor was earthy and surprisingly rich, and the act of making them felt almost like revenge against hunger itself. Nothing was wasted, not even the skin. Number 6. Navy bean soup was the quiet workhorse of Depression lunches, simmering on the back of the stove from morning until supper time. Housewives soaked dried beans overnight, then cooked them with a ham hock, onion, and whatever celery or carrot had survived the week. A pound of dried beans cost 7 cents and fed a family for 2 days. The broth turned thick and smoky, the beans softening until they broke open on the spoon. Children ate it with hunks of cornbread torn straight from the pan, dunking each piece until it turned brown and heavy. Oral histories from every corner of the country mention bean soup. It was the common language of Depression kitchens, the meal everyone made and nobody forgot. Number 5. Creamed chipped beef on toast, later nicknamed SOS by soldiers who encountered it in army mess halls, was the poor family's answer to a hot lunch. Housewives bought dried chipped beef in small glass jars for about 15 cents, tore the thin salty slices into pieces, and folded them into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Spooned over toast, the dish looked almost elegant. The pale cream dotted with dark ribbons of meat. The salt carried the flavor, and the sauce stretched a single jar across multiple meals. Oral histories from Pennsylvania and Ohio recall creamed chipped beef as the lunch served when company dropped by unannounced. A way to present dignity on a budget. It tasted richer than it had any right to. Number 4. City chicken was the strangest bait and switch in Depression cooking. A dish that contained no chicken at all. Butchers sold cheap cuts of pork and threaded onto wooden skewers, breaded in cracker crumbs, and fried until golden. The skewers mimicked drumsticks so convincingly that families who could not afford real chicken served city chicken at Sunday lunch without embarrassment. A pound of pork scraps cost about 12 cents, far less than a whole bird. Oral histories from Pittsburgh and Cleveland recall mothers arranging the skewers on platters with mashed potatoes and gravy, creating the illusion of a proper Sunday meal. Children believed the story. Some grew up and only learned the truth years later, stunned that the chicken of their childhood had never been chicken at all. Number 3. The poor man's meal was the exact recipe that kept untold millions of American families alive through the worst years of the Depression. Housewives diced potatoes and onions, fried them in a skillet with a little lard, then added sliced hot dogs near the end to brown with everything else. A pound of potatoes cost 3 cents. A pound of hot dogs was about 10 cents, and the whole meal fed for under 20 cents. The smell of frying onions and hot dogs drifted through tenement hallways every night, a signal that lunch or dinner was nearly ready. Oral histories from New York, Chicago, and Detroit all returned to this single dish. It was the meal of last resort and the meal of ordinary weeknights. The cheap salvation that asked almost nothing and gave just enough. Number 2. Spam sandwiches arrived near the end of the Depression when Hormel introduced the canned meat in 1937 for around 25 cents a tin. The timing was perfect. Housewives sliced the pink loaf thick, fried it until the edges crisped and caramelized, then layered it between bread with mustard or a smear of mayonnaise. A single can produce 6 generous sandwiches. Children carried them to school in lunch pails, the smell of fried Spam filling the classroom by noon. The flavor was salty, smoky, and deeply satisfying in a way that leaner meats could not match. Oral histories from across the country remember Spam as the meat that finally tasted like meat, the canned miracle that bridged the gap between Depression scarcity and the wartime kitchens that would follow. And finally, in first place, Hoover Stew crowned the Depression lunch table as the ultimate survival meal, named with bitter irony after the president blamed for the crisis itself. Housewives simmered a pot of macaroni, canned tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, and whatever canned vegetables they could afford, usually corn or peas, until the mixture thickened into a rough, chunky stew. A full pot cost under 25 cents and could feed a family of 6. The meal appeared in soup kitchens, Hooverville camps, and home kitchens alike. The shared language of hunger that crossed every state line. Oral histories from coast to coast mention Hoover Stew by name, often spoken with a half smile, the kind of expression reserved for hardships endured and survived. Children ate it without complaint. Fathers returned home to bowls of it after fruitless job searches, and mothers ladled it out while promising tomorrow would be different. The flavor was tomato bright and slightly salty, the kind of meal that filled the stomach and lingered in the memory long after the Depression ended. For millions of Americans, Hoover Stew was not just lunch. It was proof that a single pot could carry an entire family through the worst years the country had ever seen. And one last time, if you want the full collection, I made a cookbook with 100 simple meals like these. The link is in the description below. These 30 forgotten lunches tell the story of a generation that refused to go hungry quietly. From ketchup sandwiches to Hoover Stew, every recipe was an act of stubborn love. A mother's promise that the next meal would come. Which one would you actually try? Tell me in the comments. Your grandmother knew, and now you do too. And now you do too.